Kia ora and welcome to Cinema in Context, where we discuss all things film and the connections between. My name is Jeremy Downing.
I'm William Chen.
And I'm Sarah Watt.
And each month at Cinema in Context, we discuss two films, one current and one retrospective, with some connection. It could be the same actor, the same director, or a similar theme. However, there have been many changes in the world and all influenced by the spread of COVID-19, the virus that is shutting down cinemas and shutting down borders. And in Aotearoa, New Zealand, we are in full lockdown. Also our cinemas, as I mentioned, are closed. And a lot of the films that we were planning to talk about have been pushed back so that they can maintain an adequate box office return at a later date. So, Sarah, would you like to do the honors and explain to our listeners what our plan is for this podcast?
I'd love to, Jeremy. So, ladies and gentlemen, you will be aware that you have a plethora of options in the streaming world for entertainment over the coming weeks of your lockdown or self-isolation. We wanted to make it a little easier for you by coming up with 5 categories of films and then giving you our top tips on our picks, really, for each of those categories. So we're going to start with giving you our top picks of films that you can watch as a family. We'll then go on to talk about classic films that you might enjoy rewatching. Then we're going to throw at you something a little new that you might have missed over the last 12 months. Then hopefully we're going to really throw you a curveball with something a little bit off the wall. And then we're all going to settle in with the films that we go to in difficult times, what we might call the films for our happy place.
Excellent. Thank you, Sarah. So we will be talking about a range of films. None of us have talked about which films we've picked before this. And we're going to just see where we go. And it's a public service announcement is one way that we talked about it on the chat before this. That this is our offering to you. Here's some things that you can watch on lockdown. And we'll have a good old time. We'll try and keep it relatively spoiler-free because, we don't know the films we're going to talk about and you don't know the films we're going to talk about. But I think with all things, there can be some implied plot points from what we talk about. So, I guess proceed with caution. So let's start with a film that is a family film that can be watched on a streaming service. And William, I'm going to pass it to you, but I just ask that if you can tell us the film and also let people know which streaming service it might be available to them on.
Of course. Right, here we go. So the family film I picked for my, pick of the litter, there's so many good ones to watch in a time like this. But the one that really stood out was How to Train Your Dragon from 2010. You can stream it right now on Netflix. It's directed by Chris Sanders and Dean Dubois. And I would really maybe go out on a limb and say this is DreamWorks' best film. Not just DreamWorks Animation, but the company itself. I don't think they've released anything that surpasses this, it's pretty much a masterpiece. And of course, you would have seen the sequels and the TV show and the video games and all of the ephemera that surrounded this franchise. But the very beginning, the 2010 movie, is magnificent. It's I guess the plot is relatively simple. It's a boy and his dog, except his dog is a dragon, right? So Hiccup is a young Viking that lives in a fantastical land, the land of Berk, where the island of Vikings gets attacked by dragons. And his dad is a dragon hunter. His whole village is dragon hunters, and they want him to, be a man and kill dragons. Except he doesn't really want that. Not that he's a pacifist per se, but because he thinks there's probably a little more than what's going on. And I think the movie is brilliant on so many different levels. It's a wonderful adventure flick. The animation is stunning. The message is beautiful. I know I've gone on this podcast before at length about the horrible messages that can be found in kids' films. And this is just... It's really one for the ages. It's I was trying to think about boiling it down, and it's really about intellectualism and curiosity trumping kind of a toxic bigotry, and not just bigotry, but traditional bigotry, and how young people through wanting something different and through viewing the world through a different lens can lead the world to a better place, which is a wonderful, wonderful message in our time. And I think the movie does great because it approaches this via the scientific method. And as a science teacher, watching this movie every time and seeing how Hiccup the Viking starts to very cautiously befriend the dragon Toothless, who is an awesome creation. And he, I mean, okay, fine. Kids' movies love inventors, right? And every single kids' movie has, oh, I want to be an inventor, but no one believes me, da 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 da. But in this one, like, him actually ties so heavily into the themes and the plot because he's problem solving. He's figuring out what works and what doesn't. And it's so brilliant to see something like this, like STEM on screen, and it's not forced. It's not like those Disney movies where a little girl goes, "Oh, I want to be a scientist someday." This is really meaningful stuff. And there's two final things I want to say about this movie. The score by John Powell is brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. I would say it's one of the best scores in the last decade, at least. Just this wonderful use of Celtic instruments, really like cool instrumentation with bagpipes and drums. And then, of course, the cinematography, the digital cinematography by Roger Deakins. Well, he was brought in to help. And it really shows because, my gosh, the flying scenes, I mean, after I eat your heart out, because these flying scenes are so immersive, you feel like you're falling into the screen. And it's just such a wonderful experience to watch on so many levels. So that's my pick for family, How to Train Your Dragon.
Excellent. Thank you, William. Sarah, what is your pick for a film for the family?
Well, I see your animated movie, William, and I raise you my animated movie, which is The Adventures of Tintin, directed by that little-known director, Steven Spielberg. I was a massive Tintin fan growing up, read all of the books. I even have some in French, which I try to labor through. And I'm also affectionately aware of the old school from, I guess, 25 years ago, the old 30-minute Tintin episodes. But I absolutely loved the 2001 breakthrough Adventures of Tintin movie on absolutely every level. And it's interesting, William, that you talk about the cinematography in How to Train Your Dragon, because I think that with The Adventures of Tintin, which I must hasten to add, is technically The Adventures of Tintin, The Secret of the Unicorn, available on Netflix, ladies and germs. Initially, I thought I was just going to be watching an animated movie, and I was just rather hoping that the motion capture that we all knew had been used to translate Jamie Bell and Andy Serkis into these beloved Tintin and Captain Haddock characters, just really hoping that that was going to come off and it wasn't going to look too weird, not too animated, not too weird. And in fact, it's absolutely perfect. But notably, there is a particular scene that uses a tracking shot or a one-up, because it's not really on a track, which I have rewatched so many times trying to figure out if there was a camera, how on earth would they do this? And I can't work it out. It's extraordinary. And so that really blew me away to think, oh, even animated movies can have really tricky, difficult camera work in them. So The Adventures of Tintin, The Secret of the Unicorn, is enormously enjoyable. It is witty. Daniel Craig plays the principal villain. It's got everybody in it who is so beloved from the books if you were raised reading the books. But the beautiful thing about it is it's also a standalone film. So even if you've never read a Tintin book in your life, or your children aren't yet reading them, and I say yet, hopefully, because I believe that every child ought to, then I still feel that this is absolutely a go-to family flick. I believe it's rated G, so there is nothing in it that's going to be too difficult for little viewers, and that would absolutely be my top pick. And in having to think about this for the podcast, I immediately was like, oh, that's on Netflix, fantastic. Even though I own it on DVD, I find that I love to watch things off Netflix. For some reason, it's just that little bit easier than loading a DVD, isn't it? So I bloody well put it on my list, haven't I, in Netflix, to make sure that I remember to watch it, which is a bit stupid because it's also on my shelf, but there we are.
I do hope Peter Jackson gets to make his Tintin sequel someday, because, come on, you can do this.
I agree. And I also back you up about watching things on Netflix. I think as well because it's high definition. It's going to be better quality than a DVD.
Mm.
Well, my film for the family is on Netflix as well, and that is 2007's Hairspray. It's a musical extravaganza about segregation and then integration that is a lot of fun. The sort of the 2000s, there was a little mini resurgence of the musical, but there was limited offerings, or what we got was pretty average. So we had Moulin Rouge and Chicago at the start of the decade that really hit their strides. It really showed the genre for what it could be again. And Chicago winning Best Picture in 2002 was a big coup. But then there was a lot of average movies. Rent was definitely a very poor offering. And we weren't really getting any Disney animated musicals at that time either. So Hairspray was an absolute highlight. And I like the category says, one for the whole family. So jump on Netflix and either rewatch it again or get your kids watching. Well, our next category is a classic to rewatch. Now, I guess both of the elements of this category are up for question, whether it's a classic in the first place and whether it's worth rewatching, which is all part of the fun. So I'm going to throw it to Sarah to see what your pick is for a classic to rewatch.
So the way that I interpreted classic was to go way back in time and to choose a period piece. And because this film won a couple of Oscars as well, I'm reasonably confident, and it's Ang Lee's Sense and Sensibility. Now, I love Sense and Sensibility, and it is so rewatchable. It has amazing performances from the Oscar-winning Emma Thompson, who did indeed win. She wrote the adapted screenplay of this for the film and won the Oscar for that. And she stars as Eleanor Dashwood. Kate Winslet is luminous as her younger sister Marianne. You've just got such a starry cast of characters. Hugh Grant's in it. You name them, they're in it, basically. Alan Rickman, who incidentally is in another of my 5 films for today. Now, Sense and Sensibility, the reason I mentioned Ang Lee as the director is Ang Lee has always impressed me. He'll be glad to know, I'm sure. Anyway, Ang Lee's always impressed me for being a director who can pretty much turn his hand to any genre. And so people who loved Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, people who loved the gritty, painful family drama, The Ice Storm, will be very surprised to know that he can also turn out something like Sense and Sensibility, which is relatively fluffy, except, of course, it's about love. And it's about love in the olden days, where all a young woman had was the prospect of a good marriage, and therefore everything hung on whether she married well or she married for love. And so Sense and Sensibility, lush costumes, a fantastic script, beautiful performances. I do admit, even though I've seen it several times, that in my head I will still conflate it sometimes with aspects of Emma or other Jane Austen fare. And so for me, to rewatch Sense and Sensibility is almost like a rediscovery each time. So, you could almost say it's a family flick because it's so kosher. But I do concede a lot of the youth of today might think it's a little dry or not to their taste. But that would be my vote for a classic to rewatch, 1995's Oscar-winning Sense and Sensibility.
Love it. And it was almost one of my top 5 films as well, Sarah. I cannot remember what category I was going to put it in because I agree with you. It could go in many. Cool. Well, I might jump in with my classic film to rewatch, and then I'll leave it to you, William, to wrap us up for this category. But my classic is on Netflix, and it is a 1988 film by the illustrious Timothy Burton, and that is Beetlejuice. 1988's Beetlejuice with Gina Davis, Alec Baldwin, Winona Ryder, Catherine O'Hara. So Beetlejuice, it has got incredible production design and stop animation effects. I think it's where he really staked a claim on his style. Like, whilst he'd made Pee-wee's Big Playhouse or The Big Adventure or whatever the film was, that still felt very much like a Pee Wee Herman film. And Beetlejuice is the first time that I think Tim Burton truly he arrived on the scene, and it's a whole lot of fun. I purposely did not put it in the family film category because I think it is absolutely terrifying. And it's got one of my favorite scenes in any film, which is the scene with the family at the dinner table with friends. Sorry, there's a family friends, and the two ghosts possess them to sing Deo, Deo, which is a lot of fun. So yeah, classic to rewatch. Gotta go see Beetlejuice, and it's on Netflix. So that is my film. William, finish this off for this category.
All right. So my film is also on Netflix. And for classic, I was thinking not so long ago. I guess it's relatively recent, but it is 2003's Master and Commander, The Far Side of the World, directed by the great Peter Weir. I know you guys know this, but I love this movie. And it is such a great one to watch in these times because guys, Peter Weir makes movies about communities, whether it's Dead Poet Society or Truman Show or Gallipoli or Witness. I mean, every single one of those movies are about a cluster of people who kind of they're in their own little sub-society, and how this ticks. Master and Commander, Far Side of the World is this in spades. It's an adaptation of a number of novels, Napoleonic Wars and the Navy, featuring Captain Jack Aubrey, in this case, played by Russell Crowe, his good friend, Dr. Stephen Maturin, played by Paul Bettany. And the movie is, I mean, it's kind of a hangout movie. There's the backdrop of the war, and they have a mission to kind of find this French privateer before, he does some bad stuff, and they're on a mission from Queen Victoria. But with all of that stuff going on, it's actually not that concerned with this, with all of the big epic trappings. It's a really quiet story about the friendship between two men. One who's very brusque and, a little brutish, but intelligently so, and the other, a man of science and a doctor. His job is to save people rather than kill them. And I think how it plays out is really beautiful. They play music together. They have banter that reminds me a lot of Star Trek, how Kirk and Spock or Bones kind of bounce stuff around. There's also a wonderful sequence which just speaks to my heart, where the ship gets marooned off the coast of the Galapagos Islands, and Dr. Maturin gets to be all Charles Darwin and to discover all these species, and it actually ties into the military strategies. And so being a biologist saves the day, and it's awesome. But all that being said, just a wonderful, wonderful movie. It's one of these movies that you relax in front of it. It's over 2 hours long, and you kind of just let yourself into this nautical world of high seas adventure and brotherhood and, fighting the French. So really, really good stuff. And then, of course, just to finish off, because I also talked about the music for my last pick, the music in this movie is so good, and how they use Mozart and how they use especially Boccherini for the end credits. It is wonderful, wonderful stuff. So that's my pick, Master and Commander, The Far Side of the World.
I just want to chops in and say, in case listeners are thinking, this science guy, William, he only likes movies with science in them. No, that's not true. I can absolutely support you on Master and Commander for such an essentially basic premise, and so sort of few significant characters. It is absolutely glorious and enthralling and captivating, and all of those big 4-syllable words. So I endorse your view there, William.
Brilliant. Oh, great films. Great films. So we move on now to a category which we've called Something New. Now, we've articulated this as being a film, or perhaps even a TV series that has come out in the past year. And we've done that because a lot of stuff is coming out on the streaming services, a lot. And so I know for myself, there's a lot of things that in my mind are quite new, but they've probably been out for a year already. So that's what this category is about. And I'm going to start us off, and I'm going to mention a Netflix, it is a TV series, but it is a complete short series that I watched, I think in an entire evening, or maybe over 2 evenings. And that is Russian Doll, which is the
nice.
Amy Poehler produced, all-female creative team story about a woman who is repeating a day, very Groundhog Day-esque, in that she keeps dying and then waking up in her bathroom at a birthday party for herself with a lot of people in the apartment. And as the series progresses, it starts to pull back the layers about what's actually going on, much like opening a Russian doll, both with the world within which this character lives, but also what this means for her as a character. What are the layers that she herself has to sort of reveal and dig deep to find? It's got elements that remind me of a Terry Gilliam film. It's got elements that remind me of a Stanley Kubrick film. But ultimately it creates its own very unique world. And like I said, it's very watchable in a short period of time. It's very binge worthy, and it's something that I'm going to return back to and watch again, because there are a lot of layers there, like the title suggests, and things that can be, I guess, turned and looked at in different directions. So I'm looking forward to jumping back in. So that's my pick, Russian Doll. And I'm actually going to go hand it back to William, and then William, you can hand it to Sarah to finish us off in this category.
Alrighty. Want to back you up on Russian Doll. It's awesome. What a cool miniseries. So my recent pick is a really odd one, because as the way things are going, this might actually be one of the highest grossing movies of the year. Who would have thunk it that Sonic the Hedgehog would, blow people's minds? It is a movie, guys. It is a movie. The one thing I want to say about Sonic, or actually I want to say many things about Sonic, but the first thing I want to say about Sonic is that, so when we saw the trailer last year, we thought it was going to be disastrous. I showed it to my students and we laughed and we guffawed. And I mean, Sonic looked like some sort of CGI monstrosity designed to scare small children. It was really bad. And then the creative team decided to listen to the fans, which in retrospect might not be such great precedents. But they redesigned Sonic, they pushed back the release date, and they released it on Valentine's Day, which is a perfect movie to bring your significant other to. Well, maybe not. Maybe. I don't know. But I liked it. I liked it quite a bit. I'm a lifelong Sonic fan, and I was really surprised at how much they really stuck to what makes Sonic tick. Like, it feels alive in a way that the games do. And yeah, it's a family CG character interacts with James Marsden kind of movie, like he's done before. And so there's those scenes where he needs to learn about the importance of family and this. So that stuff's not so great. But overall, just the fun the movie brings was really, really surprising. And I think a lot of the fun falls squarely on the shoulders of the villain, Dr. Robotnik, played by one Jim Carrey in his most 90s Jim Carrey performance ever. I guess since Liar Liar, he is going full The Mask, Ace Ventura. He's stretching his face, he's doing his eyebrow thing, he's going, and it is glorious. And to see him act as, well, it's funny. Like Sonic, he's a snarky cartoon hedgehog voiced by Ben Schwartz. And he actually has to kind of play straight man to Jim Carrey, because that's how cartoonish Jim Carrey is. I would say overall this movie is a ton of fun, especially if you have kids. And I really enjoyed myself. Again, as a Sonic fan, I expected to hate it with every ounce of my being. And I ended up just, loving it. Well, maybe not loving it. That's a very strong word, but liking it quite a bit. So that is 2020 Sonic the Hedgehog, directed by Jeff Fowler, and you can find it streaming or on demand at Amazon Prime Video.
I'd like to jump in on the back of what William just said and make another interesting point that James Marsden is also in Hairspray. So we have already created an intersecting set between two of the films discussed this evening. And regular listeners will appreciate that normally Cinema in Context draws connections between the films it discusses. And so true to form, we're continuing to do so. And I believe it's now my turn to talk about a new film. So, also on Netflix. And guys, let me just say, this is going to be the newest film discussed, because I think it's only come out on Netflix in the last week and a half, maybe 2 weeks. And it is a Spanish thriller called The Occupant. Now, The Occupant is a classic 90s psychological thriller in its way, but that is not to say that it is dated. It totally works nowadays, but it definitely ticks all of the conventions of a psychological thriller in the vein of The Hand That Rocks the Cradle. To me, it had elements of falling down, and let me explain why. This Spanish thriller is about a family man called Javier, who lives in a very upmarket apartment with his wife and his sullen teenage son. He's fallen on hard times. He can't get work. He's middle-aged and works in advertising, and the young people who run advertising agencies think that he's past it. So he can't get work, and in so doing, he and his wife and son have to relinquish their swanky apartment and move to the sticks, or at least move to a down-at-heel suburb where they have sort of a rental apartment. So it really is a climbing down the social ladder in terms of status. Now, Javier doesn't get work, and that frees him up to become a sociopath, to the extent that he basically starts to fixate on the family who, it's true, the family who move into his old apartment. And so we get scenes of him sitting outside in the car watching them with their idyllic television advert-like life up on the balcony that he used to inhabit. And then things get super dark as Javier breaks into his old apartment, starts hanging out in their space, and then starts to ingratiate himself into friendships, of course, unbeknownst to the family themselves. And then things start to get very nasty indeed. So, as I say, it has veins of The Hand That Rocks the Cradle, which if you haven't seen because you were too young in the 90s, you should totally, and I intend to revisit it. And it's a really terrific Spanish thriller. And definitely there are aspects of it narratively where you're like, really? That's a convenience, or a contrivance even, but it doesn't matter because it's so well done and it's so engaging. And look, in these dreadful times in which we live, why not just watch something that's much more dreadful? That's my motto.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Well, I'm actually going to pass it straight back to you, but before I do, I thought I'd introduce the next category, which is something a bit off the wall. So something that might be a bit out of people's usual viewing boxes, or perhaps just something that doesn't really fit under any other categories. So Sarah, straight back at you.
Thanks, Jeremy. Well, I didn't want to go with anything that was too nasty, and there's a lot of nasty stuff out there at the moment, and some of it's entirely watchable and actually jolly good stuff. But I wanted to go with something that's off the wall, possibly underseen, but in my view, one of the really terrifically entertaining films of 2015. This is available on Netflix, and it's called Eye in the Sky. And Eye in the Sky is basically a film about a military operation to track down terrorists in a tiny Kenyan village, where drones and lots of technological stuff is used. But what makes it fascinating is that it takes you sort of behind the scenes of the playoffs between the various countries, in this case, predominantly Britain and America, where the commanders-in-chief or the military personnel are really dealing with a real-time situation that keeps changing and morphing, and they've got to make decisions, split decisions based on the information they have to hand. And it's a really fascinating, thrilling film. It stars the wonderful Dame Helen Mirren as Colonel Catherine Powell. It's also got Alan Rickman in it, and those of you interested in the intersecting sets of cinema and context will remember him from such films as Sense and Sensibility. It also has Breaking Bad's Aaron Paul. If I remember rightly, it was one of the first films that I saw him in post Breaking Bad, and that was kind of thrilling, or while Breaking Bad was on anyway, and that was kind of cool. And it also has Bakad Abdi. Now, Bakad Abdi is an Ethiopian, I beg your pardon, I believe he might be Somalian actor who came to prominence and was nominated for an Oscar for his role in the Tom Hanks movie Captain Phillips. And I believe the wonderful story back then is that he was a cab driver who happened to get picked for that movie. He played one of the pirates in Captain Phillips, got nominated for an Oscar, and then went on to do a bit more acting. Anyway, Eye in the Sky is utterly fascinating. And as I say, the fact that the director, Gavin Hood, who's a South African director, who's done quite a variety of things, including Tsotsi, which was a very gritty civil war, I guess, for want of a better term, movie. And he's done some average stuff as well. But Eye in the Sky is a terrific thriller. And I can't wait to watch it again. And now that I know it's on Netflix, I definitely will. Where I think the nice thing about it is that it puts the audience in the position of we need to make the decision at the same time. I don't mean like a choose your own adventure book, but I just mean as an engaged viewer, you're like, oh, well, I would just shoot the missile. And then you learn a bit more information and you think, oh, well, hang on a second, maybe I wouldn't shoot the missile now because blah, blah, blah. So it's very effective at sort of engaging you rather than you just being a passive observer of wartime atrocities, really. So there you go. Eye in the Sky, Netflix.
Excellent. Thank you, Sarah. Well, my film that is off the wall is a Netflix film as well. And it is also one that I was looking through the Netflix catalog and thought, oh my gosh, this is on Netflix. And that is 2001's Mulholland Drive by David Lynch. And I still say to this day it is one of the most terrifying moments in cinema history that I have ever experienced. There is a moment in that film where a character has a dream. Well, they're all having dreams. But there's a moment in that film where a character describes a dream that he's had, and he talks about walking to the back of a building and there being this horrific kind of person back there. And that whole sequence is still, to this day, I still think about it and just shiver slightly. But no, wonderful film with Naomi Watts. It was really her explosion onto the cinema scene. And it is David Lynch at his best, in my opinion. It has enough of a cohesion for people to connect with, but equally all of the off-the-wall, out there, spooky elements that make David Lynch so thrilling to watch. And it makes it a great film to rewatch because there's still bits of the puzzle to try and unpick every time. There's also a wonderful scene in an old theater with a woman singing Silencio, or maybe the theater's called Silencio, but she sings this song and it's this very spiritual moment with the two main characters that is another standout moment in cinema. So yeah, if you haven't checked out Mulholland Drive, put the kids to bed, maybe wait up till it's a bit darker, so 10 p.m. and then put it on, and then you can look forward to not sleeping for the rest of the time in lockdown. So there you go. That's my film for Off the Wall. I'm now going to hand it over to William to hear his pick.
Alrighty. So Sarah, you said you were trying to avoid darkness, and Jeremy, you had a pretty dark pick, but I'm going to try one up you on this one because, oh boy, this movie. It can be found on Lightbox, but I guess before I introduce the movie, I have a couple of questions to ask you both. Are you blind when you're born? Can you see in the dark? Can you look at a king? Would you sit on his throne? Can you say of your bite that it's worse than your bark? Are you the cock of the walk when you're walking alone? Because jellicles can and jellicles do. Jellicles can and jellicles do. Yes, my friends, it is Cats 2019. What a horrific disaster of a movie. I kind of don't know where to start with this. I mean, it is one of the cinematic catastrophes that will go on. I mean, this will be the new Room. I think there's so many decisions that were just so wrong-headed into this adaptation of Andrew Lloyd Webber's wonderful, 1970s musical Cats. And director Tom Hooper, who, has done some okay to good things like King's Speech, and in my opinion, some awful things like Les Miserables. I mean, he one-ups himself. Sorry, Sarah, I know you quite enjoy that movie, but he one-ups himself in every way possible. And just like with The Room, it is the joy of watching Cats is seeing how artistic decisions can be so single-handedly self-sabotaging, and the schadenfreude inherent in that is delicious. Just to put in, if you haven't seen the trailer and if you haven't seen the movie, just to illustrate how horrifying this movie is, the main characters, who are cats, I mean, aptly named, the main characters in this movie are people wearing leotards which have fur digitally painted on top of them. So they're like human proportioned cats with human faces and human hands, except they're really tiny. They're prancing around on these huge oversized sets. They eat human cockroaches. They zip out of human skin suits. Everything is dark and dreary and filmed on a lopsided angle. Idris Elba plays the baddie, and when he takes off his trench coat, you see his naked, quivering body covered with short cat hair, with a really, really strange lack of genitalia, like a mutated Ken doll. I mean, this movie has it all. So if you're into something that is legitimately quite unsettling, but also just a hilarious example of a bad movie driven by the best of intentions, please watch Tom Hooper's Cats.
Amazing, William. Amazing. I had my phone, I had my microphone on mute, but I was laughing a lot through that. And if a dear listener would like to jump into the the kitty litter, where would they watch this film? What streaming service?
On Lightbox.
So you can buy it. You can spend your hard-earned money and watch Cats. Hey, well, that brings us to our final category of the podcast, which is our go-to happy film, or a go-to happy film that is available on streaming services. And shall I jump in? Because I guess I'll share my number one pick. So this film is on Lightbox. It came out in 1997, and it is a film that my family watch every Christmas, and that is The Castle, an Australian classic that was filmed in 11 days. They were going to film it, I think, in 14 days, but they always wanted to make sure that they had good catering on their films, because they thought, look, we might not make something great, but at least we'll feed the people and we'll have a great time making it. So let's have 11 days filming, because we know that we can feed everybody adequately in 11 days rather than 14 days. So that was the logic by which they made this movie. And I think that joy and that love of being together is just completely, it completely translates into the film. And as an audience member, whenever I watch that movie, I feel like I'm part of that family. For those people that haven't seen it, it is about an Australian family who live next to the airport, and they are in they have complete contentment with their life. It is a very, what's the word I'd use? A very simple life, and they have very simple pleasures, and they celebrate their life in the most wonderful of ways. They're very communal. They're very close with their neighbors, and the airport next door, which also happens to be next to power lines, which I don't quite know how that works, but the airport next door is looking to expand their buildings, their reach, and so they have claimed that they can buy the home off this family, whether they like it or not. And so really it's a David vs. Goliath story about this family fighting for their castle, which is this, objectively, I would say, a pretty average home that has been adapted and changed in ways that perhaps make it less than average. So there you go. My number one pick, The Castle.
Do you know, that film has been recommended to me since it came out, and I still haven't seen it. And I feel like I have, because I've heard about it so many times and I'm familiar with aspects of it, but why I haven't actually seen it, I don't know. So I need to make an effort this lockdown to watch The Castle.
I think you should, and I think with your New Zealander husband, and that he is very much from this country, but originally from the United States, I think it'd be really interesting to see which pieces translate for him as well.
Yeah,
and I think
totally.
as well with your international connections, Sarah, as well, you both of you, I think, are well placed to make a judgment as to whether or not this film is, you have to be a New Zealander to really get it. I would say no, because, or an Australian, sorry. I would say no, because it's pretty universal. But yeah, I'm keen to hear what your thoughts are.
Cool.
Sarah, do you want to jump in and tell us your go-to happy film?
I would love to, simply because my go-to happy film is one of the greatest films ever made by accident. I don't say it was made by accident, but I think I fell into it by accident and realized by accident that it's magnificent. And it's 2018's Game Night. Yeah, man. Jason Bateman, Rachel McAdam in... Oh my gosh, I remember watching it for the first time and thinking, this married couple are so lovely and fun and brilliant together, and they're not horrible to each other like in all of those Judd Apatow movies, and they're almost an aspirational couple. So don't ask me about character names, doesn't matter. Jason Bateman, Rachel McAdam, married, unable to have children or haven't had children yet. And every week or every weekend, they have a game night with their friends and neighbours who come on round and play games, as the name suggests. But then one day, Jason Bateman's intensely competitive, slightly higher status brother, played by Kyle Chandler, turns up, invites himself round for the game night, and then chaos ensues. And technically speaking, Kyle Chandler says, come round to my house. So they go round to his house, which is a flash house, because of course it is, because he's a high status brother. And while they're there, a couple of hoods break in, kidnap Kyle Chandler's character, take off with him. And the people sat round the coffee table and the cheese and wine are initially a bit like, whoa, he goes the extra mile for these games, and don't realize initially that actually it's not a game. And so then a wonderful night of fun ensues that includes shootings and criminals and car chases and people being injured and possibly killed, and a whole lot of drama. And it's hilarious as well, thanks to performances by Billy Magnuson, who just seems to be typecast time and again as a good-looking oaf of a boyfriend. And in this instance, the date that he brings to game night is played by the wonderful Irish actress Sharon Horgan from Catastrophe. So game night is absolutely, I remember it just being so surprising and so fun. And it is definitely, for me, one of those films that gets better each time that I watch it. And it is unconditionally a go-to happy film, highly recommendable, absolutely not right for young children because there'd be a bunch of stuff in it that's completely inappropriate. So let's not make that mistake and pop it into the wrong category. But super fun, so many re-mentionable scenes and moments, and at the core of it, Rachel McAdam and Jason Bateman just being absolutely themselves and absolutely adorable. So there you go.
Excellent, Sarah. And I guess just to kind of throw it back at you, or at least return the same thing you said to me, it's a film that I haven't seen, that everybody who knows me and knows films has said, you've got to watch this film, Jeremy. It's about games, and of course I'm a big board game fan. And I think it's worth mentioning as well that all of your films on our podcast today, Sarah, are found on Netflix, which is the same with Game Night. Cool. Well, William, do you want to bring us on home and let us know your go-to happy film?
Yeah, will do. Just want to back you up on that, Sarah. Game Night is awesome. I love that movie. It's so much fun, as you said. Plus, Jesse Plemons is amazing in that movie. So my go-to happy film, I actually had a couple, but they weren't on any streaming service in New Zealand. So I actually went with a TV show for one. So this is found on Amazon Prime Video, and it's one of the great NBC comedies. It's Community. This ran 2009 to 2014. It's a show from Dan Harmon. And it is a show about a bunch of misfits who kind of meet each other at a study group run at the local community college and go on all sorts of crazy adventures together. There's just so much talent on screen with Community that since the show ended, you see them all over the place. Dan Harmon, he's gone on to do Rick and Morty and gone on to superstardom. Chris McKenna, one of the main writers, he went to write the new Jumanji movie that we were all in love with. Megan Gantz, who became one of the showrunners or head writers on Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Don Glover, he went from just a stand-up guy to Community to being Childish Gambino and Atlanta. Alison Brie, Jim Rash winning Oscars, and of course, the Russo brothers got their start from Arrested Development and Community, and you might know them from a little-known duo of films called Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame, aka the highest-grossing films of all time. And it's just wonderful to see these creative types really blossom. But really, at the root of it, Community, it's a show about media and about how we view the world through the lens of pop culture and narrative. There's so many episodes that are themed. So if you go in fresh and you don't know what the show is about, I mean, each episode, it might be a take on a mafia movie, but instead of drugs and money, they're trying to run chicken fingers because everyone wants chicken fingers. Or it might be an episode that's a sci-fi movie, or it might be an episode that's a war movie, except it's a paintball competition in the community college. And they play with genre, with conventions, with tropes, and they very much, there's a meta commentary on the stuff. And just the love of genre and the love of movies and comedy via movies and TV is palpable and brought to life by these amazing comedic presences and these amazing comedic writers. So that is Community. I will say it lasts 6 seasons, and the 4th season was the one where Dan Harmon was fired. And so the 4th season is pretty terrible. If you want to watch it, just don't watch the 4th season. But seasons 1, 2, 3, 5, and most of 6 are comedy gold. Community.
So, William, can I ask you, because this is another one of those, I've heard about it forever and never actually watched any of it. Is it not dated? Therefore, I could start it now and I wouldn't think, oh, this is very, whatever, 2012 or whatever it was. And also, are they standalone episodes? Is that what you're saying?
So it's interesting. I would compare it to stuff like, I hate Big Bang Theory, and I think Big Bang Theory is dated, whereas Community, a lot of the references are to stuff in the 80s and 90s or early 2000s. And so, no, I would say the comedy still holds up, especially now rewatching it. And the episodes, almost every single one of them are standalone. There are some two-parters, but overall, it's not a, let's watch a 10-episode arc. It's very much a sitcom in the broader sense of the word.
That's cool. Well, you've sold me. Thank you for that.
And I feel as well how fitting to finish our chat about a show that is literally about community. And whilst I'm sure it skewers some of those ideas, it's nice to remind our listeners that we are in this together, even if we are physically distant. We can still be socially connected. So that's a nice way to wrap us up today. Thank you for listening to another episode of Cinema in Context. If you enjoyed our podcast, then please share it with your film-loving friends. You can listen to Cinema in Context on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Stitcher, and Radio Public. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, which are great places to let us know what you think of this episode or give us future films to discuss and compare at a later date. Maybe even give us another idea for what we can do if we're still in lockdown in a month's time. But I guess, until then, ka kite anō.